Howdy everybody, Luke from Reata Ranch, and today is November 4th, 2017, and I'm with Reata Horsemanship today. We're going to be training one of our horses. It's a newly acquired horse. He's a full-blooded quarter horse. He's registered with the American Quarter Horse Association. His name is Rufus. That's his common name, and we'll get into the details of his registered name and his bloodlines later. But this horse came from a ranch south of Durango, Colorado. About 15-20 minutes from here. We picked him up. The lady that sold him to us, we've known her for a long time. She said that he's an untrainable horse. He's very spooky, very skittish, very unpredictable. She thinks he's dangerous. And she sent him to another trainer, a professional trainer, who was with him for 45 days and never even got on him. So that's what we're working with. She suggested, highly suggested, strongly suggested that we not work with this horse, and that we do something different with him besides training him to be a riding horse. Well, I took that as a challenge. I think he's a beautiful horse. He's got great bloodlines, and I have confidence that my skills will prevail in the end. My skills and my determination will prevail in the end, and we'll get this horse trained, and we're gonna see how it goes. His name is Rufus, and I'm gonna show you what he looks like. So he's a sorrel horse. He's probably 15 hands, 15-3, somewhere around there. I don't think he's quite 16 hands tall. Very thick-bodied. Like the owner said, he's quite spooky. We've noticed that he is quite skittish. We had some cattle in here with him yesterday, and he spooked a few times, and then he backed up and started kicking at him. So I'm not sure what to expect with this horse, but I know where my skill level is, and I know any horse I've touched up to this point I've been able to train. So we're going to work with Rufus. I'm going to take some video. Today's the first day I've never touched him besides getting him off the trailer and putting him in the corral. I've never worked with him any. And like I think I mentioned, he has been 45 days with a professional trainer, and the guy never even got on him. So that's where we're starting with. This is a horse that seems untrainable to other people, and I think he is trainable, and we'll see how it goes. Okay everybody, I'm going to narrate the rest of this training. Like I said, this is day one of Rufus's training. I think I explained it pretty well about what his history is. So I always start out by doing some round pinning. I want to get a sense of the horse's behavior before I get too close to him. I like to get the horse to respect me right off the get-go. So what I'm doing right now is making him move his feet. I'm pointing, clucking, and then spanking the ground and getting him to move forward into a canter. Now right there I stepped in front of him. He looked towards me, I backed up, and then I sent him the other direction. He really did quite well for his first round pinning. A lot of horses will just right there like that. He faced away from me, showed me his hindquarters. So I just put pressure on him again and kept him going the same direction until he turns in and looks at me. I'm going to keep him going that same direction, keep pressuring him. And I like to put him at a high enough speed to get him at a canter. And right there, I stepped in front of him and he looked towards me and actually took a couple steps inward. And then I pointed in the different direction, had him head the different direction. Point, cluck, and whip the ground. With any cues that I give a horse, I always want to start light, do whatever is necessary, and then finish light. And right there, I tried to get him to change directions by coming in towards me. He turned away from me, so I pushed him back in that same direction. Now I'm going to try to get him to come in towards me. He did that. He kind of went out of the camera angle, but he did come in towards me and and I sent him back the other way. Like I was saying, I like to give light cues initially and finish with light cues. Go as light and as soft as possible, but as firm as necessary to get the job done. So I point, that's my first cue, cluck, my second cue, spank the ground, my third cue, actually spank him a little bit on the butt is my fourth cue. And if he doesn't respond to any of those cues, I'll continue that pressure by spanking him on the butt until he moves, until he increases speed. And just right there, I actually got him to face me and to come in about 3 or 4 steps. And before I get him to actually start following me around, I want to make sure I have him turning in towards me and then going back in the different direction. As you'll see throughout this video, we have a lot of distractions, which is initially with the horse's training, it can be a little bit problematic to have so many distractions. It's better to have less distractions so the horse can focus solely on the trainer. Now he came all the way into the middle of the round pen and I'm letting him rest there. I'm just hanging out on the side of the round pen, letting him rest. I'm rewarding him for coming in all the way to the center of the round pen by taking that pressure away. And now I'm going to go ahead and work on getting the halter on. He is quite skittish, and there's a few times when he moves away from me, but you'll see what I do. So I'm cueing him to look towards me and putting a little bit of pressure on him. Putting a little pressure towards the back end if he doesn't move in towards me, and then go back towards his head. And there he goes. He's moving kind of in a circular pattern and then forward. And now since he's not turning away from me, I'm just following him. I'd like him to stand still, but again, this is his first round penning. So I got close enough where I can rub him between the eyes, which relaxes most horses. And I have the halter in my left hand. And I haven't moved that halter yet, and as soon as I start to move it and start to attempt to put the halter on, he gets a little more nervous. There he goes. He's nervous, but I just keep that rope in my hand, that lead rope. Got it around his neck. I like to get the lead rope around his neck first, and so I have something to kind of hang on to if he backs away, which is what he's doing now. So I'm moving that halter towards his face, and he's backing away, and all I'm going to do is just keep following him. Stay calm, keep following him, try to stay to his side. Being directly in front of a horse can be quite dangerous, especially initially when you don't know what this horse is going to do. And this is a horse that was considered dangerous, so I have to be quite careful here. I'm trying to stay to the side as best as I can while I'm attempting to put this halter on. Now, there's lots of different methods that people might use, but I just follow the horse until they finally stop moving. Once they stop moving, rub him a little, and he allowed me to put this halter on. Now keep in mind, he's had a halter on before, from what I understand. He's probably also had a saddle on. He just was never ridden. He was 45 days with a professional trainer and simply wasn't ridden. The trainer wasn't able to get to the point of riding him before some other factors came into his life and he had to stop training this horse. The horse went back to the owner, and since that point, the owners have just noticed that he's extremely skittish. He's a real unpredictable horse. She said sometimes he acts relatively normal, and then sometimes he'll just freak out, run, buck. Getting him to load in a horse trailer was quite a frightful event, actually picking him up from the owner's house. Now what I'm doing now here is desensitizing with the stick and string. And you can see how much Rufus is overreacting when I start whipping the air and I start spanking the ground next to him. He really overreacted initially. That's very, very common. Most horses will do that. A stick and string, that string makes a hard whipping sound when it hits the ground. And it's not something any horse is comfortable with initially. This is what desensitizing is all about. Is doing things that frighten the horse until they no longer frighten the horse. Most people make the mistake of taking away pressure when the horse becomes frightened with it. For example, if they started to use that stick and string and spank the ground, and the horse started to get real frightened like he did and jump away and try to run, then most people's natural reaction is to stop doing that. Well, that's the worst thing you can do for a horse, because what you're doing is training that horse to be frightened of whatever you have there. That whip, that stick and string. He thinks he's going to get hurt by it. So you have to teach him that he's not going to get hurt by it by continuing to do it until he calms down and stops moving. Now his right side was quite a bit better. And it might have been some carryover from his left side, where he just learned that, hey, this whip isn't going to hurt me. So on the right side, he was okay, and he didn't jump away from it. Now I have a shorter lead rope on initially, because I don't start out lunging a horse. I start out with a shorter lead rope so I don't have to deal with the long lead that it could get tangled up in my feet. So I'm switching the lead rope to a longer rope, and this one is at least 24-25 feet long. I think it's about 25 feet long. I would recommend at least a 23-foot long lead rope when you begin lunging a horse. So I initially start lunging him here. I point in the direction I want him to go, and then I start lightly tapping the air, and then eventually I start tapping his neck area and continue to point. And I keep that pressure up by tapping his neck area until he moves forward, until there's a change in. So he's standing still, then finally he moves forward. As soon as he moves forward, I take the stick away and I drop my hand. That's releasing that pressure. And Rufus picked this up really quickly. There's a small possibility he had some lunging work done. I don't think so, just given the fact that he didn't take off initially and start moving forward until I gave him a few good taps on the neck. And then he finally figured out, hey, if I move forward, that pressure's going to go away. Now he's moving back to his right. He didn't require any tapping with the stick. I simply tapped the air, and that was enough pressure to get him to move forward. Again, probably it's from some carryover from the left side. during this first round pen work and lunging, I did not get him into a canter when I was lunging him. I find that it's better to really teach the horse good mechanics of the motion of the lunge prior to getting them into a canter. Once they learn all the mechanics, once they yield well, once they change directions well, then I'll start increasing that speed and get them into a canter, probably the second or third training. As you can see in the background, we have some sheep. We're a sheep and cattle ranch near Ignacio, Colorado, southwestern Colorado. We provide food in the way of sheep meat and also beef to this country and the world. And we also have a lot of horses, and we train horses professionally. We have a unique ranch and a unique ability to train horses because they get desensitized to animals like cattle and sheep. So Rufus had to deal with dogs running around, sheep behind him, another horse in the corral next to him. There's also a couple pickups that drove by, a tractor that came by when I'm riding him. You'll see towards the end of this video. Now, I didn't expect to ride Rufus at all today. This was the first day. I wasn't even sure if I'd be able to get on him in any way, but I'll show you a few of the techniques that I used to be able to do that, to prepare him for his first ride. And we had a lot of success today. Now, he was having a little bit of a challenge here, yielding his hindquarters. When I get a horse to change directions, I first ask them to yield their hindquarters, which means that they're going to turn and face me with both eyes, and they spin their butt away from me. He was having a little bit of challenge with this, so what I did was I went back to a little bit more fundamental training technique, and that's yielding his hindquarters from being close proximity to him. Now, my active body language to get him to yield those hindquarters was to kind of look at his hips, hunker down, and then use that stick to tap his butt if need be. But I tap the air first. Now what I'm doing is teaching him how to yield his forequarters. And this is something, so his hindquarters he actually did quite well for his first time. The forequarters, he was very normal, overreactive, a little more overreactive than I would say actually the average horse is. But as far as learning to move the forequarters, he was pretty normal in the time it took. It took me a couple minutes to get him to start moving the forequarters. Now, what that means, what moving the forequarters means, is that he's pivoting on his hind end and moving his front end across and away from me. And what I'm looking for is for the leg that's closest to me, that front leg that's closest to me, I want it to step across away from me and in front of the right leg. As soon as he gives me that response, I take the pressure away. And I want to get a couple of positive reactions. In that way, moving the forequarters first, just with one step. I just keep that pressure. Now he stepped across. Release the pressure. Pressure, 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 pressure. So he continues to step back behind his right. So I keep that pressure on. Just there it goes. So his left just stepped in front of his right. So I release that pressure. So that was the second time that he stepped with his left in front of the right. And now he stepped twice. Now he's still overreacting a little bit to me, but that's going to go away pretty quickly. He just stepped across twice again. So I released that pressure. And releasing the pressure is rubbing him with a stick, rubbing him with my hands, and giving him relaxed body language. Now this is active body language. I'm tapping the air next to his neck and moving my hand close to his face. And right there, he made a full 360-degree turn, moving his forequarters. And I don't always get that on the first training session. Rufus is quite intelligent, and so he learned pretty quickly. Now I'm going to his right side, and I'm going to work on moving the hindquarters. So I look at the hindquarters, I tap the air with the stick, and when he moves the hindquarters, again, the leg closest to me, that back leg closest to me, has got to step across and in front of the opposite leg. So both hindquarters and forequarters movements are stepping across and in front. He moved the hindquarters well, so I went to the forequarters, and as you can see, he's a little overreactive and just doesn't know what to do. So I just stay patient with him. I have to move away from the fence line a few times because I can't move the forequarters away from me when he's against the fence. Move him away again. And generally speaking, you want to just keep this pressure on until he gives me the right answer, which is stepping across and in front. So his right needs to step across and in front. When he steps across and behind, he's going in a more posterior direction or backwards. I don't want a backwards direction. I want a sideways and spinning, rotating direction. So keep that pressure on, keep that pressure on. Now he took one small step in front, so I released that pressure. Now he's starting to pick it up. He's took 3 or 4 steps, I think. One, 2, 1. He did about half of his steps going in a circle correctly and half of them incorrectly. I went ahead and released that pressure because he made some decent steps. Now look at that. So he just did a full circle going to his left and moving those forequarters. So I release the pressure and then go to a new exercise. Now what I'm doing is teaching him to respect my space by backing up out of my space. And the first thing I do is I look towards him, I crouch forward, and I tap the stick in the air. If tapping the air doesn't work, I start to lightly tap the rope, and then I start to strongly tap the rope until he feels that pressure. It's jerking pressure on the halter, and he backs up. Now he's again being overreactive and kind of jumping side to side, but anytime I feel like he's responded correctly and backed up in any way, then I release that pressure. Had to increase the pressure there. And there he goes. I like to get at least 2 to 4 steps on the first training session. And eventually, I'll just tap the air and he's going to back away from me until I tell him to stop. And that would take anywhere from 3 days to 7 days. all of these techniques I just continue to refine, and I change techniques. I make more challenging techniques as the horse learns. Okay, he backed up real nice there. He took about 4 or 5 steps. So I moved on to the next backing method, and that's wiggling the rope side to side. I actually start to wiggle my finger side to side, then the rope. And he's kind of getting the hang of backing up. Now right here I had to wiggle the rope a lot harder, and actually started to kind of jerk on the rope to put enough pressure on the halter to get him to back away. The reason I think this angle was more challenging is because if you see behind me, there's a horse there. His name's Raven, a nice black horse. He's actually my mother's horse, who I trained. He used to be quite a frightful horse. He was also considered untrainable by his owner. So after doing some backing up, I did yielding the hindquarters, yielding the forequarters, and teaching him to back up some. Then I went back to lunging. He just yielded quite well there, yielded his hindquarters and faced me. There's a method and a reason to what I'm doing here. As I look towards his bottom, I look towards his hind end, I want him to move that hind end away, and I want him to face me. That shows respect. Now what I'm doing is actually moving the forequarters while I'm lunging. He's a little bit overreactive here again, but he did quite well. Now if I hadn't prepared him by teaching him to move his forequarters, just by rotating and me being close to him, and this might not have gone as well. I slide my hand down the rope, I step in front of him, and then move towards him with the stick. And I never had to tap him with the stick, I just tapped the air. There's basically 2 ways to change directions for a horse. One is to move his hindquarters away and to face me, and one is to move his forequarters across and in front of me. Right here I'm moving the forequarters to change directions. Okay, now that he's kind of got the hang of that, what I do is I take him relatively close to the fence line in the round pen, and I do what we call pass-through exercises or sending exercises. So I'm sending him through between me and whatever object. It can be any object, but since we're in the round pen, I'm sending him between me and the edge of the round pen. Now if you see here, he overreacted quite a bit, and he wasn't moving his forequarters and changing directions. So I just kept the pressure up until he finally went back the other way. I never had to tap him with a stick, I just tapped the air and kept pointing. Now when he passes through, as soon as his butt passes me, I step towards his hindquarters to get him to yield those hindquarters and face me. Now I've prepared him well for this exercise. You wouldn't want to try this exercise initially. It can be a little bit more dangerous because you're closer to the horse. I'm closer to the horse's hind end. I've known people who have been kicked doing this too early. So you have to be real careful and make sure that that horse is being respectful and moving his hindquarters away, and he's not going to kick. Because this makes him a lot more nervous. Horses are claustrophobic by nature. They don't want to be in any tight enclosed spaces. and that includes being between me and that fence. They don't feel comfortable doing that initially. Well, I got him doing a pass-through or sending exercise quite well, and now I go to desensitizing with sacks or plastic bags. Now, a lot of people will attach a plastic bag to a stick and then use that to desensitize initially. That's a good idea since it allows you more distance between you and the horse, so that if the horse should strike out or try to kick, you're not in danger of being hit by the horse. What I'm trying to do is stay to one side of Rufus, trying to stay away from being in front of him. By this time, I understand him pretty well. He hasn't attempted to strike at me at any time. He hasn't attempted to kick at me at any time. So I went ahead and just used a plastic bag. It's a salt sack, a salt and mineral sack that we use on the ranch, and I just used that to start out this process. I go from this sack to a larger dog food sack, and then from there to a larger tarp. I always want to start smaller and then build upon that horse's confidence. So he was doing pretty well with that salt sack. So I went to a little a dog food bag that makes more noise. And generally I desensitize the horse by first doing it in the air without touching the horse. As he starts to calm down, then I'll actually start touching the horse with it. I'll start near his back and withers, go towards his butt, eventually kind of go underneath a little bit. But again, don't try this at home if you're a novice. This kind of desensitizing can be extremely dangerous. It's very effective, and if you know what you're doing and you're in a hurry to get a horse desensitized, I think it's a great way to go. Desensitize the air first, then start lightly tapping and rubbing him with the sack. Always start on the back and withers. Never go to his butt first, or never go to his face first. That's an area he's more sensitive to. Most horses are. Now I actually take it to his face, to his nose. And he did pretty good with all this desensitizing. Now keep in mind that I first desensitized him to the stick and string, so got him used to that whipping noise. Got him comfortable with that noise and helped him realize that he wasn't going to get hurt from it. Now he continues to move away from me here because I got more aggressive with a bag. I'm shaking the bag in the air aggressively. It's making a lot of noise. And it can be quite frightening to the horse. But don't let that deter you from doing what you have to, and that is keep up the desensitizing until the horse has a positive reaction to it, calms down. As soon as he stops moving and will stand there for a few seconds, then I release that pressure. I stop shaking it in the air and I rub him with the bag. And now on his right side, I'm shaking it hard in the air, and he didn't respond negatively to it. So I rubbed him, and now I'm going to move to the large tarp, which is significantly more frightening to a horse. But again, I prepare him for this large tarp by starting with the stick and string, then going to smaller bags, and building up to the large tarp. Eventually, all this stuff I'll be doing in saddle, with the horse under saddle. I do all this desensitizing first standing still. So I want to get the horse to stand still and be calm with me desensitizing with all of these objects that move and make noise, make a lot of noise. And once he's good with that, I'll start to actually desensitize while moving. As you can see, he had a negative reaction to my throwing the tarp over the top of his back. Again, do not try this at home, especially if you're a novice. Get some professional training first, or get somebody to help you do this kind of desensitizing, because I had to block Rufus right there when I threw the tarp over his hind end and his back. He wanted to run right over the top of me. So I had to block him with my hand and make sure he didn't hurt me. Somebody who didn't know what they're doing, they might just get run over right there and hurt. Be very careful. This desensitizing is absolutely necessary for any horse, especially horses with problems. But I desensitize every horse I ever touch, and I constantly am working on desensitizing and helping that horse be less and less afraid of any object that moves and makes noise. Now that Rufus was doing fine standing still, what I did is I started to move him forward. So it's the same object, same desensitizing, but I'm actually getting him to move forward. Anytime a horse changes speed, they go from standing still to walking, that changes the dynamics of this exercise. Not only is it more challenging for me to keep up the desensitizing while he's walking and to keep him walking, it's also much more challenging for him to make rational decisions about whether this tarp is going to hurt him or not. As you increase the speed of a horse, it's much easier for them to lose their mind. As you can see here, he started to overreact to it a little bit, but I just keep the pressure on. I want him still moving forward, but I keep that pressure on by desensitizing with the bag, with the tarp in this instance. And he'll get to the point pretty quickly where he's not overreacting to it. He's walking and calm. Once he can do this in walking, then I move to doing it in trotting, and then under saddle. Now I switch sides, and he's overreacting to it. I'm okay with him moving forward because that's what I asked him to do. But on this right side, especially when he was moving forward, he was quite frightened by the tarp. Now, there is nothing wrong with a horse being frightened by this kind of thing, and there's nothing wrong with desensitizing them until they're not frightened by it. In fact, if you don't desensitize them to this kind of object, to any objects that frighten a horse, if you don't desensitize them to those objects and help them be calm with that object, you're going to have a dangerous horse. When they're under saddle and you're riding out and about, there's all kinds of objects that move and make noise, and even objects that don't move, that a horse might become frightened of. And it can be a very dangerous situation if you haven't desensitized them. I always say with Reata Horsemanship, safety is our priority and preparation is the key. So how do we make a horse safe? How do we make them safe to ride and to be around? We have to prepare them to be safe. And we do that by doing exercises that help them move their feet forward, backwards, left, and right, and also by desensitizing them to any object we can ever imagine that might frighten a horse. So he didn't do quite as well on that right side, but I did get him to where he was walking relatively calmly. And now what I do is that same sending exercise, but I'm going to do it over the tarp. Now you'll see here how he, going to his right again, has more challenge of a time. And he cut in front of me and didn't go across the tarp there. So I just kept him moving around. Now I stepped closer to the tarp, so he's not going to do that. Now this can be very, very dangerous as well, so you have to be really careful. A horse will try anything to not go across that tarp, especially if he's somewhat frightened of the tarp. I use the stick to keep him at a safe distance from me. If he tries to come over the top of me, I use that stick up near his neck or near his head to back him off of me. Right there, he tried to come straight over the top of me, so I use that stick to back him away. I can't stress enough that you have to prepare your horse well before you get to this point, because going across a tarp like this can be very frightening for a horse and can be very dangerous for you, because you're trying to get that horse to go between you and the fence line and over the tarp at the same time. I never said horse training wasn't dangerous. What I try to do is get a horse to be safe through all these techniques, and some of these techniques can be quite dangerous, especially if you don't know what you're doing. I've never been seriously hurt doing any of these techniques. I have been stepped on before. Now right there, what Rufus was doing was as he was turning and yielding his hindquarters, he was moving into me. He was too close to me, so I had to jerk down on the lead rope and get him to back away from me. He has to respect my space, and that's something I can tell you. If you don't demand that space from your horse, they'll end up walking over the top of you or running over the top of you, and you end up getting hurt. Now I did some lateral flexion with him on both sides. He did really well with that. There's a good chance he's had some of that training before. A little bit of lateral flexion. He was with a trainer for 45 days, so he must have probably done some of that, I imagine. Now what I'm doing here is actually kind of leaning on Rufus. I'm leaning on him, and then he's kind of jumpy. What I like to do is actually get my body on top of him before I ever put a saddle on him and ever get on him. I want him to feel that pressure on the top of his back from a human and be comfortable with it. Rub him all over on the opposite side, rub him on his flank, along his barrel, under the girth, along his neck. Then I swing back and forth, getting him used to that motion all over his body. And then I'll actually swing my legs up on top of his bottom, top of his rump, and eventually lie flat on top of him. This is part of what they call the Jeffrey method. And it's very, very effective in getting a horse prepared to be under saddle. Although I absolutely do not recommend it for any novice, somebody who hasn't done a lot of horse training. It can be quite frightening to do something like that initially. But Rufus is doing so well here. As I got into training on this first day, I thought, I trained him for about 2 hours this first day. And I thought maybe I'd be able to lie on top of him if I was lucky. But you'll see that we got even further than that today. This is a horse that had never been ridden, and here I am lying on top of him. Now, if I had tried this at the very beginning, he would have ran, bucked. I probably would have gotten hurt. But I prepared him for that moment. I prepared him to let me lie on top of him. And then I went ahead and put a saddle, some blankets and a saddle on him. Unfortunately, we lost a little bit of footage here of the saddling process, but we did get a few pictures of it. He was a little nervous to get the saddle up and on, and a little tense with the cinching, but he did quite well. And now he was doing so well that I decided I would go ahead and get on him. And when I first get on a horse, now I had gotten on him prior to this during this training session, so this is just the footage I got with him. But I always lateral flex once I get on the horse. I want that horse to give to me laterally. There he goes. And I like for him to do it standing still. I did put a snaffle bit in Rufus's mouth today. I don't typically do that on the first day, but I wanted to see how far I could get with him. So he's playing with the bit and a little nervous about the bit. But that's why I'm being extra cautious about doing lateral flexion. You can see him gapping his mouth. He's not comfortable with the bit, and that's okay. After a few training sessions, he will get comfortable with it. Now what I'm doing is yielding the hindquarters. I'm actually putting pressure on with both heels because I'm yielding the hindquarters, and then I'm gonna get him to walk forward a little bit. I just spanked my leg, and he didn't like that. Didn't like noise on top of him. But I'm constantly making a lot of noise on top of him. And as you can see in the background, there's a lot of commotion going on. There's a pickup running in the back. There are people walking around. At some point, there's a tractor that drives by. That's pretty good for a horse's first ride who was considered dangerous, to be able to handle me being on top of him, making noise on top of him, getting him walking around, and all the commotion outside of that. Pretty excellent. I would not have ridden Rufus on this first day if I didn't feel comfortable with all his preparation. I felt very, very comfortable with how well he did, and I gained confidence over the 2 hours that I worked with him. It was about an hour and 45 minutes up to this point. But I went ahead and got on him and then started moving him forward. Now I do like to have somebody in the round pen with me on my first rides. There comes the tractor. He handled that very nicely. The more stimulus there is in the environment, the more challenging it is for a horse. There's just more things that their mind has to think about. So if you can do this most of your training, at least initially, in an environment that's quiet and where the horse can concentrate on just you, that's optimal. And he's moving his hindquarters towards his right quite well here. He had a challenge. It was a little challenging for him to move forward, going to his left, but that's okay. he is moving those hindquarters quite well. For the most part, stepping inside and in front of the right leg with his left. I use moving the hindquarters as my first method. If I don't have somebody in the round pen with me on the ground doing groundwork with the horse while I'm under saddle, I use moving the hindquarters as my first way to get him to move under saddle. So horses have to feel comfortable. First, sitting on a horse is one thing. Sitting on a horse and that horse starting to move is a completely different animal, or it's just it requires a higher level of training. And what I'm doing now is actually teaching him to back up a little bit. So I'm putting pressure through the reins, through the bit, and holding that pressure. He dropped his head in a vertical flexion. On my first ride, typically I like to teach him to back up just a little bit. I don't get him too frustrated with it. I just want to get a positive reaction there, and I got it. He backed up, and this session went so well, went so much better than I ever could have imagined. Understanding his history. This is after 2 hours I was able to ride him. This is a horse that was 45 days with a professional trainer and never ridden once. So I felt like we had a lot of success. And right there I made sure I prepared him before I got off. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for watching. It's been a lot of fun to start Rufus and to see how much success that we had after just 2 hours of training on the first day. We look forward to many more great training sessions and helping him become a great horse and making the very most out of Rufus. Keep in touch, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Reata Horsemanship, and also go to facebook.com/Reata Ranch Adventure, and make sure and like and follow our Facebook page there. And also, if you go to reataranch.com, that's REATA ranch.com, you can see our website and see some of the packages that we offer at the ranch, and also with our horse training. Okay, see you in the saddle.